Hello everyone, welcome to Edureka's self-paced learning module on jQuery UI development. I will be your instructor for this course. My name is Varun, and before we begin, I would like to share a short introduction about myself. I have been doing development for about 6 years now. I have done development in several languages. These include Python, JavaScript, PHP, Ruby, Java, Android, and for the past 2 years or so, I've also been working on Angular 1.x. JavaScript continues to be one of my favorite go-to languages for its ease of use. And jQuery is something that I used extensively in the past, and I believe that it's a very important stepping stone when you're learning about front-end development. It is one of the key stepping stones that every developer needs to know a little bit of at least before they go on to things like AngularJS or React.js and Vue.js. So that's about me. So what are the objectives with this module? The first one would be an introduction to jQuery and its history. We are going to then talk about the jQuery object, which is also represented by the dollar symbol. We are going to talk about DOM. What does it mean? We are going to talk about CSS selectors, a small mention about IDEs for jQuery as well, jQuery CDN and its installation. So just a quick refresher on what HTML, CSS and JavaScript is for. So HTML is basically the structure of your website in terms of the architecture. Okay, this in the sense that, okay, I want a box here, I want a round shape here, and this is the layout, right? CSS adds any sort of styling to that structure, whether it's from color or shadowing or font size or font weight, multiple things. JavaScript, however, brings your website to life, right? So of course, you can make a pretty HTML and CSS web page, but then if it doesn't do anything, and by doing I mean when you click on a button or when you hover over something or something else, it doesn't really do anything. It kind of becomes boring after a while, right? I mean, on Facebook, how interesting would Facebook be if you could not really like anything? You could just read information. JavaScript adds interactivity to your web pages. How you might have experienced that a little bit already by if you have done JavaScript, but otherwise you're going to see now how it does that and what are the ways in terms of how you can add interactivity to your web page. And as image goes, right, HTML is for structure, CSS is for presentation, and JavaScript is for behavior. So let's look at the basic DOM structure. So this is just a simple HTML document here, and they have laid it out in a tree sort of pattern. Okay, there is the document, it's the parent of everything else, the document tag. Within the document tag, then you have HTML tag, which further contains head and body, and then head contains title and title contains some text over here. If you look at this, right, and then you have h1 tag which contains some text, and then you have the p tag which contains some text. The DOM really refers to, so whenever you're writing HTML, what is really happening is that you write certain directions to a browser. So a browser is a software, right? Through writing HTML, you're writing certain directions to the browser that, hey, paint my web page in a certain way. So it's like if you had a friend and he had a canvas, that canvas and that friend together are the browser. And you, as a developer, are the person who's instructing this browser or person, and you're telling this person, hey, draw a box for me, make it this wide, make it like this, make it have this shadow effect, print or display a message like box 1 over it, the font size, the font weight, multiple things, right? Or if it's a document, like let's suppose you're dictating a document to somebody, okay, the heading should be jQuery training. Start with the subheading jQuery intro, then start with the paragraph, plan your jQuery training now. So that is sort of the way that the browsers work. This HTML is essentially directions. They are essentially directions to the browser. Okay, what the browser does is that it takes those directions and creates something called as a DOM, a document object model, out of it. Now why does it create a DOM? Because it needs to apply the styles that you have provided from the CSS. It needs to do several things to it. So it converts it into something called as a DOM and makes it available to you and to itself for manipulation. And a large part of JavaScript or jQuery has to deal with DOM manipulation. And we're going to figure that out as we go along. So when it comes to DOM manipulation, right? If you look at this example, some of you might be familiar with this, right? So let's talk about this particular line. Let's suppose that there is a div tag with the ID results. This particular line basically gets that DOM element to you in this variable, in this JavaScript variable. And the following lines are setting the HTML inside it. So basically you are setting HTML, or you're setting text inside an HTML using JavaScript. Now that's a very, very powerful concept, right? Right there. That you can deliver a web page to a user with a certain look and feel, and then based on how the user decides to interact with it, you will make changes to that web page. You can literally change this entire web page right there and then, because you have JavaScript helping you out, because it has access. It can read that HTML document, that DOM. It can read the DOM and pick out the nodes in the DOM. So think of these as nodes, and think of jQuery having access to each of these nodes and having the ability to modify each of these nodes, whether it is the content of the node or it is something else that it can do to a node. Now, one thing about the DOM is that every browser behaves a little differently. So if you have ever felt that your website doesn't look the same on Chrome versus Mozilla versus Internet Explorer versus Opera or versus Safari, and I'm sure you must have experienced this with even very, very good websites, like they tend to differ quite a bit depending on how careful the developers were. So the reason is that it's not broken, it's just that every browser behaves differently. So it's like this. Consider each of the browser as a person, right? This is friend A, this is friend B, this is friend C. You are giving directions to paint the DOM. So you want something called as a document to be painted or printed on a canvas, and you're giving instructions to each browser. But each browser behaves differently. Each, like a person, the browser behaves differently to instructions. Now 90 to 95% of the behavior is similar, but that 10%, 15%, depending on what kind of instructions you're giving, might change. So the websites don't look massively different, but they are still a little different, right? So that comes from who developed that browser, what did they want to build it for, what is the main purpose. So Internet Explorer, for example, is built primarily for security. It is supposed to be very secure. Chrome is built for something else, Firefox is built for speed, Safari is built for something else, Opera is built for something else. And based on those decisions, sometimes these behaviors change, where they might not react to a CSS property, or they might not perceive a certain directive in a certain way. So this is a problem. This is a huge problem for developers who have to build quickly, and they have to build websites which would sort of at least 90 to 99% of the time behave in a similar way across browsers. Because if you were to build for different browsers, or if you were to write separate code, say doing the same thing for different browsers, it would be just too much work. And developers are supposed to be lazy, right? So jQuery helps us out. jQuery really helps us out. So think of jQuery like a manager, okay, who knows each of the workers. So if these are my friends, he knows the behavior of each and every friend. He knows Firefox requires more directions than Chrome, or Chrome is a bit slower than Internet Explorer, or Internet Explorer needs to be given the instructions slowly. Now, these are not the actual differences, but I'm just giving you an example. Now, as a manager, jQuery knows how to deal with the different behavior of different browsers. So it eliminates the need for us to write code specific to browsers. Instead, it takes care of it for us. That is the first and the most fundamental reason why jQuery is so popular. That it removes the dependency to write code for each and every individual browser. Makes it very easy for people like you and me to build websites really quickly. Okay. So what is jQuery then? So jQuery is essentially a JavaScript library. So it is still JavaScript. Please don't be confused about this. I see people early on being a little confused in terms of what is the difference between JavaScript and jQuery. JavaScript is a language. jQuery is a library built using JavaScript. So jQuery fundamentally is nothing but a lot of JavaScript code that has been written by developers who are way experienced, who have 25 years of experience developing and programming and so on and so forth. So jQuery is just a library. Now, it was first released in 2006. It's one of the most popular libraries with cross-browser support. It is lightweight being that the size isn't too much. It improves developer efficiency, of course. Easy to learn because it relies on a lot of CSS based syntax. We'll come across this soon. And the current latest releases are 1.9 or 2.1. You can use either. Both are sort of the latest releases. Now, the next question is why jQuery? So jQuery is a JavaScript library designed to simplify the client-side scripting naturally because of the syntax being similar to CSS, cross-browser support. It helps in creating dynamic web pages. Now, dynamic in terms of whenever you are able to manipulate the DOM, that is what adds a dynamic nature to your web page and your web application. So that is one of the fundamentals again, that it creates dynamic web pages which respond to user input. It is intuitive and easy to learn. We'll figure that as we go along. It integrates with IDEs, so IDEs have out of the box support for it. It helps in pages loading faster. So because the size is small, the download time of the library in itself is small, which helps out. Generally, when you find websites to be slow, either it's your internet connection, and if that's not the case, then the website is heavy. Heavy being that the size of the code that you're downloading to run the website is a lot. Next is that it helps in creating animated pages like Flash. So before JavaScript or jQuery or even jQuery became really popular, one of the typical ways to animate a web page was using Flash. However, that meant that as a front-end developer, you had to learn HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and Flash. Further, Flash is not, I think it would be sort of sufficient to say that it's not the most elegant of things to deal with when it comes to browsers. Again, a lot of problems across browsers and across OS as well. So what happens is that jQuery, because it's so easy to use and there are so many functions already built in, it provides us with a lot of functionality to create animation, which is similar to Flash but without using Flash. So in terms of you learning newer things, it reduces the number of newer things that you have to learn. You don't have to learn Flash and you're still able to create beautiful animations using jQuery, which is also a part of a dynamic web page, right? A web page which can sort of animate based on user input or based on certain sections being loaded and so on. So HTML document type, it informs the browser what document type it is. And again, it has to do with the interpretation of the document. So again, the document, the HTML document just contains directions to paint a web page. And the doc type basically tells the browser which version of directions these are. And so it is very important. Till HTML4, this was the way that you would mention the HTML document type, and from HTML5 it's just very simple. You just type this and that's it. This would be sufficient. Now CSS selectors. So I'm pretty sure that you guys must have come across this by now. There are various ways. So whenever you give directions in terms of, hey, I want the box to be of red color, or I want the font to be 14 pixel, or I want to divide up the page in columns of 20%, 20%, and 40%, right? You write that code as CSS, but then how do you link the HTML and CSS together in terms of what style is to be applied on what element? That happens through selectors. Now there are multiple ways to select or identify a tag. So imagine it in this way, that there are 8 boxes that you told your friend to paint on the canvas. Now you want one of the boxes to be of red color. Naturally the friend will ask, hey, which box? Now if the boxes were numbered, that they were identified as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, you would tell your friend, hey, box number 3 needs to be of red color. Now when you're doing this, this is an identifier, and selector is, I think, a synonym. You can consider it as a synonym for an identifier. So there are various ways to identify HTML tag. One of them is the tag name in itself, that is a p tag or a div tag or a span tag, and these are then universally applied. So if I apply a span tag with font size of 14 pixel, that will be applied across anywhere in my HTML document that I use a span tag. Then there are ID selectors, which you set by setting the ID on the HTML document. Then you can of course set the class selector as well. Now tag, ID and class tend to be the most popular ones, but then there are more. There are a lot of ways in which you can set selectors. There are pseudo class selectors, there are selectors based on relationships, that is the parent-child relationship. Then there are attribute based selectors, and then there are multiple selectors as well. So For now, I think we can focus on the top three, that is tag, ID, and class. But I think even selectors based on relationships tend to be commonly used as compared to the other ones. So the jQuery object, if you have studied JavaScript, you must have studied the object. So just a quick refresher in case somebody has forgotten. Let's say I open my local host. Okay, so this is an empty web page right now, but just to quickly show you what I mean is that this is an object in JavaScript, right? Curly braces open and curly braces closed. And it essentially contains key value pairs. So if I had to count the number of fruits, I could store it like this. And then if I do a dot apple, it would print 1, a dot banana, it would print 2, and a dot guava will print 3. So similarly, what you have is something called as a jQuery object. Now, there are two ways to use the jQuery object. One is the dollar symbol, and the other one is jQuery written in this particular casing, that is J small and Q capital, and the rest of them small again. You can use either. It is fine if you use dollar or if you use jQuery, but a lot of times the examples that you will find on the internet will be using dollar. So I think for this course, we will stick to dollar. Now, dollar is essentially a function, okay? You need to really look at it like JavaScript syntax. So it's dollar is nothing but for you a variable. So if I was to show it to you again, you can consider it like this, where dollar is equal to, right? Now I can say dollar dot a equal to 3. And if I print dollar, then it's an object. So dollar is a valid identifier or a variable name in JavaScript in general. But what jQuery does is that adopted the dollar as a symbol for itself. That all jQuery needs to be accessed through the dollar. And if you look at it, it's not just a variable. Actually, it's a function. jQuery, this parenthesis, right? In JavaScript, functions are called by the parenthesis, the opening and the closing of the brackets, and then code inside it. So this is essentially the jQuery function, which has a lot of things inside it, a lot of things as we will discover. But you really need to visualize it in that particular way that I'm just calling a function. That's it. Okay. So a jQuery object is like an array which contains 0 or more indexes. It also contains object methods like length, context, and selector. So I think as we go along, we will figure out how all of this is true. So it's a jQuery object contains a lot of things, right? And I will just show it to you in a few moments what all it contains. But keep in mind that it is nothing but JavaScript at the end of the day. So we are not going to lose sight of the fundamentals. Very, very important. So some IDs for jQuery. So I'm going to be using Atom. There is Sublime Text, again, one of the very good ones, lightweight. There is Dreamweaver. You can also use it in the browser console, like I was just demonstrating. There are online editors such as JS Fiddle, JS Bin, Cloud9, and then there are debuggers. So I just use the Chrome Web Inspector. In Mozilla or Firefox, there is the Firebug, and you can use either depending on what you're familiar with, what you have installed. All of them are good. So jQuery CDN and installation. So there are two ways of installing jQuery in the web project. One is to download jQuery and have the file like just like a JavaScript file stored on your laptop or in your project and give the path to it. So that is what I have done. I have the jQuery.js file here. If you can see, this is a lot of scary JavaScript. Don't be confused by it. No, you don't have to read through all of this. But I just included it like this. I just added it. It's over here. It will find it and I'll be able to use it. Okay. And the other way is through the CDN, which is called as a content delivery network. So just a small note, I'll not go into the depth of CDN, but CDN are basically hosted by big companies such as Cloudflare, such as Google, such as Amazon. jQuery in itself might have its own CDN, which are basically localized servers. So servers which are close to your specific location respond to your request. The benefit of a CDN is that the server is physically close to you. Physically meaning that it's not sitting in the US. If you're in India, it's sitting in Singapore. Or if you're in US, it's not serving you a file from India or UK or Europe. It is serving you a file from US itself. So physical proximity plays a role, of course, in transfer rate, as well as the fact that the file version is being maintained and you don't have to maintain a copy of the file on your own machine. That also plays a role. Then there are certain other benefits in it being a standard file, so on and so forth, versus you choosing it from, something that a co-developer downloaded. So you are sure that it is the original jQuery and it's not been modified, it's not been messed around with. So because if you think about this, right, there's this file, I might accidentally edit it. I just edited it. Now something might break if I'm one of the developers on this project. But if you're downloading it from the CDN, I can't really accidentally change something. So that is why the CDN helps out. But if you're developing on local, I usually prefer local being, if you're just in development mode, I usually prefer having the files on my machine because that's much faster, because it's just serving the files from my machine to my machine. And I don't have to wait for it to download from a server. So development, I would suggest that go with downloading the file. Okay, so before we start with this, let me show you something. Now notice that I've already loaded the JavaScript file, the jQuery files, and I'm doing a console.log of dollar. I have not defined dollar anywhere, unlike the browser. Okay, and I'm going to reload this page. I'm going to reload this page on my browser. I'm going to just get rid of this. And if you notice, it has jQuery HTML line 36, and it has done a console.log. It has returned a function. So jQuery dollar is a function essentially, which can be a little head spinning, but in JavaScript even functions are objects. Okay, when it said that dollar is an object, it is correct, and when it says dollar is a function is correct, because functions are also objects in JavaScript. Now if I do jQuery, I'll get the result as the same function. And for comparison's sake, let me do it like this. So if you notice, both of these are returning the same thing, right? They're the same function. Let me just remove these for a second. Yeah, let's also try something else. Let's see if they are same. And they are. So as I said, jQuery or dollar, it is the same thing. Okay. So now talking about what we are doing here. So I have a simple HTML file which has a div tag. Now notice that there is nothing inside this div tag. So even when I'm loading this page, right, there is nothing to be displayed. It's an empty HTML page with nothing inside it. Everything is basically, I've commented out everything. There is only one div tag, but it has nothing inside it. Now let's suppose I wanted to display something after the page was just loaded. How does that work? So let's break it apart piece by piece. So I have dollar. It takes something called as a document. When I pass in document over here, jQuery understands that I'm referring to the entire HTML document right from the very top. And then I'm going to use something called as ready. Ready is a function. Again, it's a function. So this is a function, the one that I've highlighted, which has another function on top of it. JavaScript allows us to do this. Okay, that there are functions defined on top of each other. It is also called as chaining. That I have a function topped on another function. So I'm calling a function which takes in a parameter. The parameter is another function. So I'm basically telling the browser that, hey, when the document is ready, execute this function, the one that I've just selected. Just run whatever is inside of it. So I'm not setting a timer here because I don't know when the page would be loaded or when the page would be ready, right? I'm just saying that, hey, whenever the document is ready, do whatever is inside this function. So let's try it out. Let's do a simple console.log. Document is ready. Let me actually also comment out all of this. Now let me reload the page. So this prints, and let's see if we had this outside. Let's set it on the line number, on line number 36, and then on line number 42. So if you see, right, line number 36 is executed, line number 42 is executed. But the document got ready later on. It executed this, it set this instruction, it moved on to this instruction, and when everything was done, and when the page was ready, so the document was not ready until and unless it comes down to this one. Unless it goes through everything, the document is not considered to be ready by the browser. So this function does not get triggered. But then internally JavaScript triggers this function once everything is ready. So this is really the first snippet of code I think that most people go through when they're writing jQuery, that when the document is ready, do something. And the next thing is that we want to display something on the web page. Now, jQuery allows us to select an object or select a element in the DOM, or to break it down, it allows us to select a particular HTML tag. Now, selection can happen through multiple ways. It can happen by saying div. So it will select all the divs available in the document, all the divs. Even if there are like 1,000, 10,000 divs, it will select all the divs. Not recommended that you do this because naturally it causes a lot of problems. So like CSS, if you wanted to set the style on all divs, that is what you would do. Then the next option is to select it by ID. So if you look at this over here, the ID is ready demo. So I can just set the hashtag like I would do in CSS. So CSS would be something like this, right? Or let's reduce it a little bit, right? So hashtag ready demo. In a similar way, I can do hashtag ready demo over here, which tells jQuery that, or the browser in fact, that this is what we are referring to. This is what we want something to be done on. We want to set the text inside it because it's empty, and we want the text to be document is ready. So we were doing a console.log, but now we want to show the user that, hey, my web page is ready. So we want to say web page is ready. Now let's reload the page. As you can see, it appeared. It wasn't there. It is my code which put it there. So anything I print over here, it will show over here. And this happens after $document.ready. So when the document got ready, then this function was executed, and the function execution wanted this to happen. First, select the tag that you want to make changes to. So I want this node to be modified, manipulated. I want the text inside it to be web page is ready. And that's what I ended up doing. Going back to the slides. So it is executed as soon as the document is ready for DOM manipulation, and we assign a function, right? So moving on. Now, another thing that jQuery allows us to do, which I was talking about, is chaining, or even actually JavaScript allows us to do is chaining functions on each other, where functions are executed one after the other. So let's suppose I wanted to set the color after it loaded. jQuery provides me with a method called as .css, and whenever you're kind of searching for these things online, you have to refer to them as .css in jQuery, and you will immediately open the documentation on Google or jQuery website. So .css in jQuery, this is a method which takes two parameters. The first parameter has to be the CSS property, and the second parameter has to be the value. Okay, so let's run this for a second and see the result, if it works or not. Okay, it already did, right? Web page is ready. We can also chain another one to this, or let's try a different one. Let's try it as something like font weight, and let's set it to 700. Now it becomes bold. If I make it as 100, it is not bold. If I make it as 1000, it is okay, it is not bold. Yeah, 1000 is not a valid property. Yeah, 700 is. So it becomes bold. And I can even change the color again. So I can make it blue now. So I'll go over here, I'll select the color. So if you look at it, it's a sequence. First do this, set the text, then color, then this. So again, I'm giving directions like to a friend. But this time the canvas is ready, and probably it's a second friend, which is my JavaScript and jQuery friend, which I'm telling that, hey, now do this, now do this, now do this. And to try the last thing that is given on the slide deck, which is fade in, which basically tells it to fade in, sort of an animation. Let's look at how to make it slower. So this is the jQuery documentation. I'm just going to try and figure out how to make it slower. Okay, so it takes a number. I can give it a number. I think it's in milliseconds. So I can say that, hey, show it in 2000 milliseconds or 100 milliseconds. Okay, let me set it to 5000, which should be 5 seconds, which is pretty slow. Okay, Right. I think my live reload is enabled and that's why it's kind of not loading really. It's not really showing that effect. Let me try it out like this. Okay. Yeah. Moving on. So jQuery also allows us to declare functions of our own on the dollar object. Now, this again goes back to the fact that functions are also objects and objects can contain functions on top of them, right? So an object in JavaScript can have like one of the keys be corresponding to the value which is a function. So to define a custom function on JavaScript, this is sort of the way we would do it, where we would call $.fn.myCustomFunction and then define a function which would do something. And then we can do further things to it. So if you have to define your own jQuery functions, there is a possibility to do that as well without, rewriting the entire library. However, what I would suggest is that just keep it as a mental note for now because it is preferred that you are a more advanced user of sorts who has done this, who has sort of familiarity with jQuery and JavaScript quite a bit to be attempting this. But it's a good to know thing that you can extend the library. And one of the most beautiful things about jQuery, you can extend the library through your own means and fashion. Okay, coming to querying the DOM or selecting various parts of the DOM object using jQuery and JavaScript. Okay, so I have an example for you. It is nothing but a simple list. Okay, and what is happening in this list is that there are three items. Wait, let me actually just show you the HTML. Right, so this is a list. There are three items in the list. There is outside, it's an A tag, not referring to anything, but probably we can just refer it to Google. Then there's the div tag inside it, which has another A tag inside it. It's for demonstration purpose. Not necessarily that you will build something like this, but it would help me demonstrate a certain amount of concepts. And then it has other elements inside it. Okay. As I just showed you that we queried the DOM using the ID selector, but we can also use other CSS selectors as well. But let's stick to the ID selector for now. Now, over here, the example that we have is that if there is an ID called as fruits and we had to take the text out of it, it would return the entire li, all of this inside of it. If we then go to again, this is a separate way of referring to it. This is another way, and this is another way. Neither one of these is right or wrong. Use the one which you're most comfortable with. So I think a lot of you might be comfortable with the first option. This one is a more generic one, and this one would only select the li inside it. Okay. So as I have told you that jQuery relies on CSS selectors, it uses the same power of them. Now there is the ID selector. It looks for a unique ID and selects it and sets the text inside it. We've already done this demonstration, right? Moving on to the next one. Then there is of course the class selector as well. So if I were to, let's suppose, go to this document and change the class to ready one and change this to ready one as well and change this to ready one and then go and then reload the page, it still works because now it's a class. So instead of the hash, it's a dot. Now the question might be when to use which. Really depends on you and really depends on your, let's suppose if you are making the project, I would typically say stick to one. But in case you don't want to define extra ID, so let's suppose you have a div tag, right? And you defined a class on it. Now you don't want to add extra HTML to it by adding an ID tag and referring it to as something else in JavaScript and forgetting the reference again and again. So it might be convenient to use classes wherever they are applicable, and in case a certain element of your HTML does not have classes, then you can probably define a ID on it and use those. And then there is naturally the element selector. So let's suppose I will add a heading over here and I'll say heading h1, close it, and once the page is loaded we're gonna say dollar h1 dot css color, we're gonna say red, and we're going to then go ahead and reload the web page, right? So if you saw for a brief second it is black, but then it quickly transitions to red. So even by using the h1 tag, that is pretty much like how it would work in your CSS. You can set it up, or you can change the text entirely. And we can do this. We come to this and we change the h1 tags. We change the h1 text. Okay, moving on. Then, of course, there are the attribute selectors, which is by saying that, let's suppose there is an A tag and it has the target set as self, or it has a href which is set to google.com, and I want to select it and I want to modify the color of it. So the way this would work is that, let me just add an A tag over here, and the target is, so it has an attribute set on it, and then there is another one. Okay, so what jQuery allows me to do is go over here, say select an A tag which has target equal to self, and you change the CSS color from blue that it would typically be to green. Okay, I forgot the quotes. The quotes need to come here, and I'll change this to double quotes. Okay, let's try it out. So if you notice, the color has changed. Let me mute all of these out so that you can see clearly. The color has changed. If I were to change it from self to blank, the other one, the Google blank one, gets colored. Let's see if I change this to yahoo.com. Okay, let's suppose we made a mistake. Both of them say Google inside it, like to the user, but actually one is for Yahoo. So what we want to do now is we want to select the one which says yahoo.com, and we want to change the text to say Yahoo, right? So if you notice, earlier in the HTML this is being set as Google self, but then we changed it, we selected on the basis of the attribute, and then we change the text inside it. Okay, so this is how you will basically select based on the attribute. So attribute refers to, so I know ID and class are also attributes, so it might be a little confusing in terms of course, I think when you've read CSS, it would refer to class and ID as attributes as well, and they are attributes, rightly so. But then what we are referring to here is kind of attributes which are not ID or class. Okay, next is universal selectors, which is basically a star symbol, which will select everything in your document. Not recommended that you do this. It will eat up a lot of memory, probably crash your website on the user's browser. But the star symbol will essentially select everything. Next is position selectors and pseudo class selectors. Right. So let's try this out actually on this particular one. Now, if I had to select the li, let's suppose I had to select the item list, item minus list, and then I had to select the li, and I had to do the CSS color as red. Let's see what the result is. So what happened is that this is the way that you can select the children inside a parent. So what I said is that, hey, select the item list, the element with the item list, and then go to the first one inside it and set all li as with the CSS as red of color. Now what if I had to do this only on the first one? So if I had to do it only on the first one, this is how I would do it. Notice how the difference is. Only the first one is colored red. So I'll just remove this. It's just CSS precedence which is playing here. So let's suppose first one is coffee. So first one is set as coffee. If I had to select the second one, I would go as second. Okay, I think I made a mistake. Let's look at, yeah. Let's try with 2. This works only with first and not with second. But if you have to just select the first one, I think it also works with the last. Yeah, it works with the last one as well. But okay, right. So it works with first and last, but not with second, third, or fourth. So it's more about first and last are easier. But if you think about it logically, the number of items in a list can be 100 as well. So it would not be possible to kind of name the middle ones, the second, third, because different people will refer to them in different ways, and that would be unmaintainable. So you can select the first or the last of a thing as well using first or last. And then, of course, the pseudo classes. So the other option here was that if I suppose knew that everything else had to be turned away, I could do it like this. So I set the not, and then yeah. So here is what I did. I said A, which does not have href as google.com. Set that text to Yahoo, which does not. So not is also available as an option. Next is traversing the DOM. So traversing is basically walking through the DOM. It's like walking the path, walking element by element by element by element. And with query selectors, which is the first part, you can make the first selection. But then if you want to keep going down a particular nested set of tags in your HTML, that is where traversing the DOM will help you out. And then there are some common functions available to us. Find finds all matching elements. Children is same as find but moves only one level down. Closest moves up the DOM tree. So it doesn't move down, it doesn't move inside, moves up the DOM tree until it finds the matching. Parent moves up the DOM tree but up to a single level. So closest will find the closest match even if it's way up. Parent will just move to the next immediate single level. Okay, it will find the parent of this particular node. Next moves down and targets the immediate following sibling. Now what is important to notice here is the sibling part. It will notice, it will go to the sibling. It will not go to a child. So if there is a li tag, right? So li tag, if you call it on an li tag, it will move to the next li tag. It will not go to anything inside it, any HTML inside it. Previous is just like next but moves up. So it moves to the preceding sibling, and siblings it targets moving up and down. So if I select it on an li tag, it will select all the other siblings. First gets the first element from the selected set and last gets the last. So I think that kind of shows where I went wrong earlier. So first and last, basically first goes on the first one and the last only on the last one, not on the middle ones. But if you have to traverse the middle ones, then probably something like next or previous or closest, that's something that will come to help. So let's see a couple of examples of each one of them. Okay, so let's mute this out and mute this out as well. Okay, so what I've done is that I've added a simple button here and I've added a click function on it. Now what I've done here is that whenever I click on this button which is present on the web page here, something will happen. Now what that something will be is being defined by me here. So what this is going to do is going to go to item list. This UL that we have created is going to find the A tag. It's going to make them of red color. So let's try this out, right? Let me click on the button. So all the A tags went red. Coffee was not an A tag. In fact, let me, so that we can remember, and we can say this is yahoo.com, and we can say this is, and if I click me, see how it found only the A tags and not coffee and not milk and not tea, and it set them to red. So essentially item list, find A, set the color to red. Next one is the children example. So if I was to do this, let me try and do this. Or let me first show you this example. So we did find, right? we did it on item list, but let's do it on the first li instead, which will select this particular li tag. And let's see what the result is. Pretty much like the same one. I selected the li, the list item first instead this time, and I set the color to red. Now, what if I change it to be children? What will happen? Only google.com gets colored red. Why is this? Because children goes to the next immediate one, which is this one. It will not go inside. It will not go more than one level deep. If this was outside the div tag here, so this div tag contains this, right? If this was outside, it would have worked, but then it is not. So this doesn't work out. So children goes to the next immediate one. Let's go to the closest one. Let's see what the outcome is. Try to guess before I demonstrate. Closest goes to the immediate closest one. Let's look at the definition once. Moves up the DOM tree until it finds the matching element in DOM. It moves up the DOM tree actually. Okay, so nothing is happening. The reason is that it is moving up. It is not moving down. It is not moving down. So we need to find something up here. So if we add an a tag over here, which is outside of UL, so it's no longer about being inside UL. Outside UL, a tag. Okay, wait. So I think it would be better if we, so inside what closest does is that it tries to look for the closest parent of a particular type. So what I've done instead is that I've selected this particular a tag which is inside li, and I've said, hey, find the closest li and set the color to red. So this is what this is going to do. It's going to go to the closest li and it's going to set the color to red. The page is reloaded. Let's click on this button, and if you noticed, the li this time, the li gets turned color to red. So there has to be a relationship. What I was trying out earlier was that there was no relationship between the li tag and the a tag outside it. But now we know that it has to be a parent-child relationship where it tries to find the closest parent up the chain. Now going to the parent example, we are again going to select the insider div a tag, and we're going to find the parent and we're going to give it a border of 1 pixel. So let's try it out. Okay, so the div tag containing yahoo.com gets a border of 1 pixel over here. Okay, next is, so we're going to go to the first li, we're going to go to next, and we are going to give it a css border of 1 pixel. First li, and it gives it to milk because it is going to move to a sibling, not a child, not a parent, but to a sibling. So at the same hierarchical level as itself. Let's go to the previous one. Okay, so in fact, let me make it a little simpler. So it will go to the last li and then it will go to the previous sibling. So it will go to t, and but from t it will go to milk. So this till this it is at t, then it goes to milk, and then it sets the CSS. Next is siblings. So first li, then the siblings, and sets them with the border. Okay. We could also do it like this, where we select this and right, instead of last we can do first, and then it will set it to both of these, or last will do it to both the above ones. Okay, next is first. So let's see what this does for us. We'll select li and we'll select the first one. So we select li and we select the very first li that we find, and this one will select the last one. Of course, there was another way to do it. So there are multiple ways to do the same thing. My recommendation would be to select the one that you're most comfortable with, that you remember at the top of your mind, and just use it. There's really like little right or wrong here. especially for beginners. And eventually you will get into the mood of using these functions in a way which makes sense, which is sort of convenient for you at the given moment. So they come in handy when you are dealing with a lot of complicated DOM manipulations. For beginning purposes, keep your focus on the first part, that is just selecting an element using class identifier or the ID identifier or the tag identifier. Thank you so much. And as always, as the Edureka pedagogy, please do give your feedback. Always happy to improve, always happy to serve you. Thank you. Have a good day.
I hope you have enjoyed listening to this video. Please be kind enough to like it, and you can comment any of your doubts and queries, and we will reply them at the earliest. Do look out for more videos in our playlist and subscribe to Edureka channel to learn more. Happy learning!